Hello. Now, this is the first time I'm doing this like this. Midnight Charlie Man Patrick. I almost feel like standing up at the moment. The purpose of this video today it's a historical thing. It's for historical purposes. It's like putting my memory down. And when I was talking about Sadistik Exekution and my history with the band, and this is my memories. I was there 50% of the time, maybe 40% of the time. I wasn't there the whole time, but I was there some of the time. And as a side thing, and if Pete, if you ever see this, I don't know what you'll think about it. Say it, if you ever see this, I don't know what you'll think about it. I don't think Rock will ever see this. Maybe Dave Slade will see it. As a side thing, there's some people in Europe, because there's a big write-up in the European magazine saying Sadistik Exekution, one of the biggest death metal pioneering bands ever. And their albums are very interesting. They have a particular sound to it. I was actually listening to Magus, the Magus last night. I decided to listen to the Magus last night. I hadn't listened to it for a few years. It's got a very unique sound to it. It has a very unique sound to it. Very unique. It's quite an interesting album. Now, over in Europe, and there's even certain parts in America, but mainly over in Europe, that Sadistik Exekution developed a reputation as a great death metal outfit, a great death metal band. And they developed this reputation. And online, in various YouTube videos and write-ups in articles, people have said, "Oh yeah, Sadistik Exekution. They were a premier Sydney death metal band in the early 90s, which continued into the 90s, and legends." And this is from people who never met them, who just read the articles, the interviews, and who never had a chance to get to travel from Europe down to Sydney, Australia, right, or to Melbourne. I think they even did a couple of gigs in Melbourne. They did do a couple of gigs in Melbourne, Australia, but Sadistik Exekution did do a couple of gigs in Europe. And there was the fan base, people from the fan base in Europe didn't get a chance to come down to Sydney. And so I've actually heard people say, "Oh," well, mostly in written form, say, "Oh, I wonder what those guys are like. I wonder what they're like, because they're legends." And I have a totally different perspective on it, because I know them. And when you have that perspective, like when you know them and you were on that scene, it's a little bit strange and weird when you hear someone else say, "Oh yeah, I've listened to the albums, I've seen the live clips, legends, I wonder what they're like." And it's like, well, from my perspective, it's like totally different. It's like, I was there, I know these guys. I actually filmed this in my head at about 2 AM this morning. I started filming in my head, putting this video together in my head. I did it all in my head. I went through much of the history. I'm getting a little bit of anxiety at the moment, only because, yes, I did think about this all in my head. I went through much of the history from late high school years through the early days, through 1990, through 1992, even up until the early zeros. And I thought, will I film it? I thought, I'm not going to film it at 2 AM in the morning. And I acquired this t-shirt a couple of years ago from eBay. I never got the original of this back in the day. I can get into that later. High school. In high school, I knew Frank in high school. History background. Peter Zanti. the drummer of Sadistik Exekution, Frank, and Frank's brother Pete is the drummer of Sadistik Exekution. And I sort of hung out with high school, in fact, but he was very busy hanging out with Marcello Rizzuti and Valadi Strathopoulos. They had a falling out, and I would talk to Frank in the corridors at Canterbury Boys High School. And I spoke to Frank in the corridors at Canterbury Boys High School. We didn't have the same classes together, but he used to wear Iron Maiden t-shirts, and he used to wear various metal t-shirts.
Memory from 33 years ago takes a bit sometimes. The other kids in the form above us would literally wear like tight jeans, tight black jeans, literally wear the tight black jeans and Iron Maiden t-shirts, Power Slave, Number of the Beast, them wearing Dio, there was Poison t-shirts, GNR, Metallica. Some of the kids wore this. There were a number of metalheads in school. They made up a certain percentage of the grade, maybe about 30%. So on any one day there might be about 10 kids in our grade who were walking around in metal t-shirts, and some of them wore them underneath their blue shirt, and some of them wore them without any uniform. And those kids that wandered around the corridors and wandered around the school not in uniform, they would get away with this for a certain amount of time before the teachers got really pissed off with this and pulled them up on it, and they either got sent home or they got told to come back the next day in uniform. And what they'd do is they come back the next day in uniform and with their blue shirt over the top. That would last for about half a day before they would unbutton their t-shirt. And some of the metalheads pulled me aside in the corridor. They cornered me and they said, "What's this? What's this?" And they said, "Bon Jovi. Oh, look who's..." And they said, "Look, he's trying to live in the fast lane now." I didn't know what a fast lane was. I remember when Injustice came out and when Sound of Heaven came out. And I remember what would happen is, on the day that albums would get released, there would be 4 or 5 metalheads who would be late for school. They'd arrive at school late and they'd walk into class late, and they had the Utopia bag with them, and they had the vinyl in the Utopia bags. They'd gone to city in the morning, grabbed it on the day of an album release, and they'd carry the album around with them all day. I don't think kids do that today. Of course they don't. I never did that. I never actually did that. It used to take me a little while to save up for my albums, and I'd buy my albums from Bankstown Mall. But that's another thing.
And I was always fascinated by everyone who had a Guns N' Roses t-shirt or a Poison t-shirt. I was not... The metalheads at Canterbury Boys High School were not generous to me, except for a couple. Well, I didn't really have a great deal of conversation with Frank at the time. The very end days of high school, I did. And so I got bits and pieces of things from the kids in the corridors at Canterbury Boys High School, mainly Menace. They weren't very generous to me. And so Pete had been to Canterbury Boys years before that, because he's about 8 years older than me, I think Pete's about 8 years my senior, maybe 9 years my senior. And upon leaving high school, that's right, I was about Frank, upon high school, I said, "I bought Who Made Who AC/DC." And he said to his friend, "Oh, Pat bought the Who Made Who." And I was kind of like cool, like, felt like I was in. He said, "Pat got the Who Made Who on vinyl." I still have it on vinyl. It took me years and years to figure out it was a soundtrack. I thought it was an actual studio album, which kind of is. It took me years and years and years to figure out it was a soundtrack album. Maximum Overdrive. Now, what I was going to say was, out of high school, I started to hang out with Frank. Went to his house. I'd call him up, went over to his house. That was before the library days. Went over to his house, and we'd listen to some Iron Maiden and stuff like that. We'd listen to some music. And on one of the occasions, like maybe the third visit to his house, to Frank's house, On one of the occasions, Pete was in the lounge room. Pete was in the lounge room in his dressing gown, and his things. He was like this, and it was like, and I think he must have said something to the effect of, he said, "Big night, big night." Oh, that was a big night. Had a gig. I didn't really know the term gig at that point. Wasn't even 18 yet. And he had his drum kit in the corner, but it was either, there's two drum kits. The real one, and the one with the pads. What I'm saying is the drum kit, and then the one with the black pads. And I remember a copy of Pretty Boy Floyd, Leather Boys with Electric Toys on vinyl on top of the turntable. And Pete didn't really say much. Pete, he had very good demeanour. He didn't really say too much to me. He didn't know me. I didn't know him. We didn't connect because I just met him. But I conversed with Frank about music, and Pete would talk Sadistik Exekution, business. It sort of went over the top of my head at the time because I didn't really know what that was. And by about the third or fourth or fifth, by the time about the sixth time, I just went over there to hang out, because that's what you do when you're late teens. You go to a friend's place and you hang out. And Pete would say each time I would go over, Pete would say a little bit more to me, a little bit more to me. And what I remember is being mostly keen about Sadistik Exekution. It was called SADX, just shoot the breeze with Frank. And Pete would say, "I got a gig on tonight." And he'd say, "Come see SADX." He'd come see. He'd say, "Come see my band, man. Come see the band." And I was fresh, brand new to the gig scene. I remember that Pete would, as I would visit more and more often, Pete would get on the phone in the living room. Dave Slade was the business person of the band. I think Rock did a lot of that as well. Dave Slade, I remember Dave Slade going over to the Ashbury House when I was there. And Dave was all about business. He's like, "Oh, you're going to buy a t-shirt. Get the album. So, while I was there on a couple of visits, Dave would come over. Dave Slade would go to the Ashbury House. Now, going to probably jump all over the place here because that's what memory is like. Lewisham Hotel, first early days. Manuel, and Susie and Michelle. Because Susie Michelle was I liked her. I was very young and shy. Michelle was very nice, lovely person. Susie and Michelle, lovely people. And the thing about the metal scene, Sydney metal scene, was everyone was friendly. Everyone was friendly. You know, so you had Guns N' Roses t-shirts at the time, Poison t-shirts, and Motley Crue t-shirts, and because Dave Slade was an aggressive businessman, which helped work for the band, that he'd be like, "Buy the t-shirt, gotta buy the t-shirt, gotta buy the t-shirt, gotta buy the t-shirt, buy the t-shirt." How many times people have heard Doomed and Disgusting, him say Doomed and Disgusting over the years, probably not even funny. And I remember being at a Sadistik Exekution gig, and I remember seeing Chris Hayes on stage for the first time, and he had all these safety pins in his arm, and I didn't really know what to make of it. And they were nice to me. Rock was nice to me. I never had much to do with Rock, but he was nice to me. He was polite to me. I got along well with Chris later on, but Chris was a bit of a mystery to me in a sense, but Chris was nice to me. And the more that I would visit Frank, the more that I would go out to gigs, he would converse with me a little bit more each time. And as the years would pass, and Susie and Michelle were great girls, good memories of them. One day at Campsie, and Dave Slade was always in Campsie at that time, always there. And Frank and myself, we were at Campsie Centre, and we bumped into Dave Slade, and he had t-shirts and stickers and all that other stuff, and he gave a t-shirt to Frank, and he said to me, $20 for a t-shirt. And at the I regret this. At the time, I was a bit funny with money. Dave Slave said to me, oh yeah, looking back now, he said $20 t-shirt. You know what? Looking back now, at the time, I wish I had just given him $20 and got a t-shirt. And he just handed Frank a t-shirt, and I was like, oh. In my mind, I was like, where's mine? Looking back now, I wish I had just given him $20 and got a t-shirt. It was the white one with the Sadistik Exekution in red. I wish I had just given him $20 so I had a t-shirt. Wish I just had bought the t-shirt, and I would have had it. And Dave Slave was always in Campsie. I might just do the next part upstairs. See, I'm used to doing this. See, I'm used to doing this. I'm used to standing here like this. Standing here like this is a lot better for me, a great deal better. I'm used to standing here like this, so much more comfortable. Okay, good night, Johnny Man Patrick. Okay, let's see how this turned out. By the way, it's the 13th of April 2023, and it's 8:34 p.m. Back in the good old days of Lewisham Hotel. It's still called the Lewisham Hotel. I think someone bought it. Someone did buy it. It's new management. A different name now, but I think it's still called Lewisham Hotel. And they had regular gigs there, and they were mainly death metal gigs, but I think they had all types of gigs there. And back in the days of yesteryear, the memories are a little bit vague. It was a very long time ago. A good time was had by all, and they were good times. They were very good times. In regard to the Sadistik Exekution gigs, I went to a few of them. I didn't go to all of them, and oh, okay. Now that's something which is very important to mention. Is that when you look it up on YouTube, the live clips of Sadistik Exekution, they're interesting. However, actually witnessing a gig and being there in person was pretty good. It was really good. It was actually being there in person is totally different to watching a video on YouTube. And they were actually quite engaging. They were quite captivating. And I never actually did witness Chris Hayes putting all the safety pins in his arm before the gig. I never actually did witness that. I don't think I actually ever went backstage particularly. Rock was a bit of a clown on stage. I don't think he took the whole thing seriously. He just did his own thing, and Rock had an interesting stage presence. Yes, bit of a clown on stage, bit of a clown persona on stage. I don't think they took it entirely seriously. The people that were there were cool. And I do remember Slasher, a guy called Slasher, who always used to cut himself up, and the girls would always, Susie and Michelle would take care of him a bit, but that came about in later years also, because I remember once in later years I was wearing my Motley Crue t-shirt one day, and I hadn't seen Slasher for a while, and I came across him. These are things that I wasn't thinking about in my head yesterday, but now it's occurring to me as I'm saying this now. And I was on the train and Slasher saw me and went, "Poser!" And then I got close to him. I was like, "Slasher, it's Pat." And he's like, "Oh, hey man," and he recognised me. Hey. He went, "How you doing?" "Yeah, Motley Crue t-shirt." Slasher was a very interesting guy, and he attended many gigs back then, and I don't actually remember everyone from the scene at the time, but I do remember a handful of people. It's a long time ago, but there were quite a few bands on the Sydney scene. Look, I was 17 at the time, and I don't remember everything. I don't remember everything about Sadistik Exekution, but I just remember going to these gigs with Frank and meeting people, being introduced to people. And I think that Sadistik Exekution would not have been as big as much of an important element to me if I hadn't gone to the gigs with Frank. Because I went to the gigs with Frank, and he was a direct channel to that. I mean, he was a direct connection to that. I didn't know who they were, so I just got introduced to them directly because I was there hanging out with Frank. Frank said, "Come along to the gig." So if I just had went, the thing is that if I hadn't went by myself, I don't know if I would have found out about it by myself. It would have taken me a lot longer to get there. But if I had went by myself to the Lewisham Hotel, they wouldn't have, and if I hadn't known Frank, none of them would have known me, and would have been, I wouldn't have known them that way at all. But because I attended with Frank, that was my direct line. I mean, I got directly introduced to people. Frank didn't necessarily introduce me, but because I went to the gig, because I was with him at the gig, I just met everyone directly. Everyone, and because they were friendly. And because I would attend the Lewisham Hotel at Melbourne Nights regularly, I would go along there regularly. Everyone, it was like a family. I got to know everyone. And donning, much of the time, donning my Guns N' Roses t-shirt. And yes, I must have seen Sadistik Exekution like 3 times, and the gigs become more sporadic. There was more distance between the gigs. Things were different. There were no mobile phones around, and things were just different back then. They didn't really have technology. There was no technology back then. And Lewisham Hotel still exists. Rarely go there. Don't really go down there anymore for anything. Haven't been there in years. Last time I went down to Lewisham Hotel was probably about 2010. And as the years passed into the mid-90s, I had more conversations with Chris Hayes. Even at one point that I really disconnected from the metal scene, because I went through a phase where I disconnected completely from the metal scene. I was really out of touch with it for a while before I got back in touch with it again. That was somewhere around about 96, maybe till about 98. 2001 I was a bit out of touch with the scene as well, but still hanging out at in Newtown. I remember the Club 77 days and the King's Cross Hotel days, because they had Blink at the back of the lane in King's Cross, and there was Club 77. Club 77 was very good, and Eli and the boys, and Zoran and Ivor and the Divine Electric, but I'm skipping ahead somewhat. And there was a different drummer at one point because Pete did not want anything to do with anything more at one point. Yeah, at one point, and they got a different drummer, and just like I think a day or so before, a couple of days before that drummer broke his arm, so Pete came back into the fold. Oh, I like being down in the garage. Oh, eh. Okay. Hello, and thus this continues. Okay, so as the years would progress, like sometimes during the 90s, and even in the zeros, but in the 90s I would turn up at Frank's place. And sometimes Frank wouldn't be there. Pete would open the door and say, "Come in, man, come in. Frank's not here, just come in anyway." Okay, this is very important. I'm gonna get this out. Frank and Pete, they had very different personalities. Frank had a very different personality to Pete, and I keep meaning to mention that. Pete would either be in the lounge room or in the kitchen. They'd be sitting by the phone, and those were back in the days where he had an exercise book and had all the numbers handwritten down. We all did. And in fact, when you went out to a gig in those days, or you went out to a nightclub, usually carried a pen and paper with you. There was none of this. Oh, are you on Facebook? What's your Facebook? What's your Facebook? There was none of that. And Pete would be in the kitchen. So I would go over there, and Pete would be there. And as the years progressed, I would sit with Pete in the kitchen, and just to clarify things, the subject was never sadistic execution, because they don't like talking about it. They never like. Actually, one way to make those guys cringe, one particular way to make those guys cringe, is to mention the band, to mention Sadistik Exekution. That will make them cringe. So I would talk to Pete about history. Pete knows his history, and so in those days I wasn't that great with my history. Pete would talk about history and religion and things like that, and then sometimes he'd say, "You want to hear my songs? You want to hear my songs?" And so we'd go into the back room where Pete had a certain amount of Sadistik Exekution memorabilia and other musical artifacts, and Pete had all his own music, which now he recorded some of it. He used to record some of it with Wilco. I think it was Wilco, Dave Wilco. I don't know if Dave Wilco was a part of Meridian. Dave Wilco ran the studio that Pete went to. But what was I going to say was that Pete would play me all the songs that he recorded, and they were fantastic, really, really good. Well, some of it was acoustic stuff, some of it was electric guitar stuff, a lot of it was acoustic stuff. He played the drums, he played the guitar, and even he did the vocals for some of it. There was some amazing stuff there, absolutely amazing stuff there. Now, some of it was hard rock orientated, some of it was glam rock orientated, some of it was goth rock metal orientated, some ballads there, some comedy songs, and what keeps coming into my head now? Alright, so the year 2006, because I'm just remembering that, something about society. It's like, Bog. It's been so long. Society, something about society. Okay. Something about society. Look what you're doing to Frank the Crank. Society. Look what you're doing to me. Society. Is that it? I'm trying to remember the name of the band, because it was an outfit that Pete had in 2006, 2007, because I remember he said to Tia and her friends one night that they were going to be his backup singers at the Sando, because he had a gig at the Sando. And society, look what you're doing to me. And there was a bunch of songs. He had a collection of songs. The thing is, Pete was a very versatile musician. And I just remember back in those days, in the 90s and also in the zeros, that sometimes in the back room in the house at Ashbury, Pete would play me. He said, "Come and hear my songs, tell me what you think." I think Meridian, something had something to do with Holland. Something had something to do with Holland, I don't remember now. And Reverend Chris Hates. I just call him call him Chris. A lot of people call him Reverend Chris Hayes. Chris Hayes. He is a versatile guitarist, and he has a lot of very great solo work. In fact, let me just look him up on here on Google. And I've been to a few of his shows. Look, I went through some weird periods throughout the years where I didn't really attend anything. I went through some pretty weird phases, which involved alcohol, beer, and in fact, actually, I haven't had a drink for 5 weeks. I haven't had a drink for 5 weeks now. What do we get? What do we get? Here we go. Yeah, what was that? Ever heard of them before? Sadistik Exekution? Here's your groups. Right. Yeah. Really good. Now I went to see Chris Hayes in October last year in Surrey Hills. He had a show on with a gallery. He's got fantastic artwork, and he put on a great solo guitar performance. It was really terrific. Oh, and then 8-Ball Junkies. 8-Ball Junkies came along in 2005. Yes, to mention 8-Ball Junkies 2005 with Dean and Mikey and Kylin. So, in regard to 8-Ball Junkies, it was Kylin, it was Courtney, and Courtney. You have to remember, in regard of bands, a band has a following, usually like an extended family. So when a band does a gig, they have a certain amount of supporters at that gig. When a band plays, they have friends, regular friends that usually attend most gigs, and there were a few of us. Good times. As an extended point, people who only attend international gigs would not be very aware of this, and I prefer local gigs. I prefer the more intimate atmosphere of a local gig, and you go along to a local gig and there'll be the band there, but you have quite a few people. You might have 5 or 10 people hanging out with the band, and sometimes, more often than not, there's a few of those friends who might as well be in the band. Chris Hayes attended many 8-Ball Junkies gigs, and also Eli Reskov, who had Centerfold, Tommy Gunn, Divine Electric. So Eli would attend many of the. In fact, actually, Pete said we want Eli to be our singer. I remember this, and so what happened? Diana and Mikey hung out with Eli, but Eli never joined 8-Ball Junkies, and they got Kylin, because Kylin was just rehearsing with them. Kylin rehearsed with 8-Ball Junkies and ended up being their singer. 8-Ball Junkies do have an extended history, but just focusing all on the old times at the moment. Okay, the Sydney metal scene, a pretty big scene, and for honourable mentions to Paul Corby and Ronnie Simmons, and there was a few areas, different groups of friends, a bunch of bands, 5 or 6 bands on the Sydney metal scene, and who were interconnected. You used to have the Hell City Glamours, and you used to have, I think it was a band called Lust. I think Ronnie Simmons was in Lust. Or am I getting that right? Okay. Doomfox. Doomfox were a very good band. Good band. Mad Charlie. there was Fox still is Fox Company, and the good old days when you'd leave the town at 2 or 3 a.m. and walk up to the Sly Fox. Chris, he's got really good shows, really good shows, and really good artwork. And also the Chris Hayes and Rock both have a great amount of artwork to their name. The only reason I'm talking about this is because I watched that documentary about San Francisco and I got a bit triggered, and I was comparing scenes in my head, and then I happened to think about Sadistik Exekution, and that's why I'm talking about it now, because I started thinking about that as well. I started thinking about the scene in Sydney in the early 90s. Even though the scene that was talked about in San Francisco in the Oakland area is from the early 80s, I started to think about the scene in Sydney from the early 90s. Anyway, yes, and that came to be for a while. Yeah. Bit of trauma involved there. Bit of trauma, bit of sadness. Good times. Memories, good times. An older time on the Sydney metal rock scene. I'm gonna wrap this up. Midnight Time, man. Patrick. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If I do upload this, appreciate it. Thank you.